Coming up on New Day at Arirang, the Omicron variant of COVID-19 spreading like wildfire worldwide. Europe, one of the regions most affected, and in Europe, France, seeing the brunt of it, breaking record daily caseloads day after day. A big year-end meeting of North Korea's ruling elite, Kim Jong-un and the regime's most senior officials in Pyongyang, to set policies for 2022 as the North's social and economic challenges pile up. Plus, Presidents Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin schedule an urgent phone call for Thursday, the second such call in less than a month. As tensions mount over Ukraine, Russia has amassed tens of thousands of troops near the border.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on December 30th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Oh Soo-young filling in for Kim Morgan.
And I'm Mark Brumo. For the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. So we begin with the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea and worldwide, going into year 3 of this pandemic. Hundreds of millions of vaccines administered and treatments widely available, but the problems are mounting rather than improving, both here and overseas.
Yes, we're seeing caseloads hitting record highs in different parts of the world. And for more on this and other updates, our reporter Shin Yeon is in the studio. Lovely to see you, Yeon.
Good morning.
Well, let's begin with the global situation with the rise of the Omicron variant as well. It's not looking very good, is it?
Right. The pandemic situation has worsened. And if I cite statistics from December 22nd to 28th, on average, more than 935,000 were infected each day across the world. And the virus particularly surged in countries like the U.S., France, the UK, and Italy. The United States recorded the highest 7-day average as of Tuesday, with more than 265,000 cases. And Johns Hopkins University compiled the data and analyzed that the latest record surpassed the previous high mark of around 252,000 average daily cases set on January 11th of this year, which is 2021. Now, this suggests that though a year has passed since governments around the world have actively rolled out vaccination campaigns and virus prevention measures, the pandemic situation has not been tamed, mainly because of the spread of both the Delta and Omicron variants. Take a listen to how the WHO Director General evaluated the threat posed by these two contagious strains of the virus.
Right now, Delta and Omicron are twin threats that are driving up cases to record numbers, which again is leading to spikes in hospitalizations and deaths. I'm highly concerned that Omicron, being more transmissible, circulating at the same time as Delta, is leading to a tsunami of cases.
And health experts in the United States agreed. Many said January will be a difficult month due to the spread of Omicron, but it's not only limited to the United States. As I mentioned yesterday, France has been seeing a surge in COVID-19 infections. On Wednesday, the country's health minister said the country added 208,000 new cases in a single day, which was not only a national record, but the highest daily tally ever seen in Europe. And the health minister said more than 2 people tested positive every second, according to the current infection rates.
Now, compared to other countries worldwide, the situation isn't nearly as severe here in South Korea, but it's still putting a strain on medical workers and the healthcare system. What's the forecast looking like for new daily infections on this Thursday?
Right, so we're expecting the caseload to stay above the 5,000 mark yet again. Up until 9 p.m. Wednesday, we recorded 4,533 infections, and that was down by 178 from what had been reported the same time the day before. And compared to a week ago, this figure came down by 775, which suggests that the toughened quarantine restrictions are starting to have effect, and we're seeing a downward trend in COVID-19 infections here.
But at the same time, we can't ever really let our guards down when it comes to the pandemic, can we? So, well, South Korea for now, it's hit pause on the return to normal scheme, and it reinforced the measures since the quarantine measures since December 18th, and well, they're set to expire this Sunday. So do you think the authorities are going to extend that?
I think they are, because we've seen throughout the whole pandemic, authorities constantly extended social distancing measures for an extra 2 weeks. And this is most likely to happen again during a meeting on Wednesday where an advisory body of government officials and experts gathered to discuss how we can return to normal life. Authorities said current distancing measures should last for at least another 2 weeks. And the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters will take all opinions into account and announce their final decisions tomorrow, a Friday, here in Korea.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of us saw this extension coming, but are officials going to lay out their specific reasonings behind why this decision was made?
Right. I think the reasoning is that the surge of Omicron, obviously, we've seen a lot of cases in the country. On Wednesday, we saw Omicron figures added in a span of a single day surpass 100 for the first time. And the country has so far detected nearly 560 Omicron cases. And this figure may rise sharply because South Korea has now invented a PCR test that is able to detect all 5 existing variants, including Omicron, within hours. Now, prior to this, variants could only be identified through genome sequencing, a process that usually took several days. In fact, Korea has become the first country in the world to introduce this new testing method, and it will be available for use starting today, this Thursday.
All right, well, thanks for your report, Yang. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on, millions of travellers, many of whom were looking forward to some year-end travel as they couldn't go anywhere last year, continue to face disruptions.
Thousands of flights are being either cancelled or delayed around the world due to the rampant spread of the Omicron variant. Our Kim Yo-sun has more.
International air travel faced another day of mass delays and cancellations on Wednesday as the spread of Omicron strains airline schedules and staff. According to the flight tracking website FlightAware, 7,700 delays were reported on Wednesday alone, with a third of them flights into or out of the U.S. In addition, it said over 2,500 cancellations were reported worldwide as of midday. Flights in and out of the U.S. and China were most affected. In the U.S., a number of flight crews, attendants, and other airline employees called in sick due to COVID-19. Earlier this week, South Korea's largest airline, Korean Air, has been ordered to suspend all flights to Hong Kong for 2 weeks as 5 passengers aboard a plane tested positive for the virus upon landing on the island. There have now been several days of disruptions globally, with thousands of flights canceled during the Christmas holiday season. All this comes as COVID-19 cases have ballooned in recent weeks. Winter weather, including storms and snow in the U.S., also played a role in the disruptions. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. For many countries, 2021 started with lockdowns, with worries over the then new Delta variant of COVID-19. But at the outset, many had hoped that this would be the year that perhaps we could move past this pandemic. However, the dark cloud, as we all know, of COVID-19 is still hanging over all of us, with most countries now under yet more restrictions because of this more infectious but potentially less severe Omicron variant. In many developed countries, including South Korea, the vaccine rollout expanded quickly, with tens of millions of people being jabbed over the course of the year, and medical staff basically working their way down the list of the most at-risk groups first. Then came the booster jabs as concerns rose that vaccine protection was waning for those who had their shots earlier in the year. So we wanted to ask, where do we stand as of now as we head into 2022?
Well, so far it is looking like there will be yet more restrictions to deal with. What some experts fear will be a tidal wave of Omicron. For more on where we stand globally in regards to the Omicron strain, we're joined by Professor Michael Tull, an epidemiologist at the Burnet Institute in Melbourne. Professor, now many countries are seeing a record number of cases since the emergence of Omicron, but so far there's a sense of cautious optimism that Omicron may not be as severe. Doesn't seem to be filling up hospitals so fast. Do you think this suggests that people may finally be learning to live with COVID?
Good morning. I think it's a little bit early to conclude that. As you said, cases are just skyrocketing. So far, mainly in Europe, North America, but it's not a seasonal thing. It's nothing to do with winter. Down here in Australia, it's summer. And we're reporting around 20,000 cases a day, and it's increasing by about 50% every day. So I think while for an individual, the news that it's milder is good, at a population level, if you have so many cases and just a small fraction end up in hospital, that could still overwhelm the hospital system.
Yeah, now a number of experts have said, I know there's a wide range of opinions because as of yet 100% of what Omicron isn't yet known, but they have said COVID just isn't as severe in its current form as it was, say, a year ago, citing in many countries the fact that fewer people are going to hospital and there are a lot fewer deaths from Omicron than there were of Delta or previous strains. Now, given the data available to us as we speak, would you be in favour of loosening restrictions, or do you think they should stay the same or perhaps even be made even tougher?
I think at least they should stay the same, as I think they will in Australia. But of course, we're a federation, so they vary state by state. In the state I'm in, there are vaccine mandates to enter restaurants or other hospitality venues. Indoor masks are mandatory. There are density limits on indoor settings and QR code check-ins. And I think that's the minimum. Now, I think we have to get out our calculators and do a bit of arithmetic. Let's say on a day in somewhere, a town somewhere, there were 1,000 Delta cases. On average, 5% were hospitalised. That's 50 people each day. Now move forward, when you have 10,000 cases of Omicron, even if only 1% were hospitalised, well, that's 100 people, twice as many. Now, once they get to hospital, they may not need to go to ICU, but it's still a big stress on the hospital system. And we're seeing that, for example, in Sydney, where the number of people in hospital is going up by about 100 every day. And, saying 1% is much lower than the data. The data that I rely on so far is from England, Scotland, Denmark, and South Africa. And those studies show that Omicron is between 30 and 70% less severe than Delta. So I'd take the middle figure of 50%.
And Professor, well, South Korea, the United States and other countries have slashed the length of quarantine for people who test positive with Omicron from a couple of weeks to around 1 week in some nations. What's your opinion on these decisions?
Well, I think the data that I've seen from the US is very convincing. So they've cut the amount of time you isolate to 7 days. And that's based on the fact that they have found that people with Omicron are infectious for a shorter period of time than those with Delta. And that's because the virus just doesn't stay in the throat for very long. And they estimate that people are infectious from about 2 days before they develop symptoms to about 3 to 4 days after they develop symptoms. So they've gone to 7 days. I think the UK has gone to 10 days, and Australia is considering going to either 7 or 10 days.
Well, yeah, it is a bit of a balancing act between actually having your economy running to a certain degree and the healthcare system and the health of the population. Now, finally, we're entering year 3 of this pandemic. A lot of people are extremely wary of the whole situation right now. We have all these vaccines out. We have the potential for a less serious version of COVID. At what point do you think we are going to reach, it seems like it has to be fairly soon, when we aren't going to have to restrict to such a degree our own personal lives, perhaps to protect vulnerable healthcare systems?
Well, it's been tiring for epidemiologists too. And I don't have a crystal ball. This virus keeps ambushing us with new surprises. And the main problem we're facing is that in much of the world, the vaccination rate is very low. For example, across Africa, it's no more than 10% fully vaccinated. That means the virus can circulate and maybe mutate again. And we don't know. These mutations are random. They're basically mistakes the virus makes when it multiplies inside human beings. Now, the next mistake may make a new variant more severe. I don't want to scare people, but we just don't know how this virus is going to evolve. So I think it's just far too early to consider changing the way we approach this virus. I'm not suggesting lockdowns. We may have not need lockdowns anymore, but we will need these other restrictions that are proven to work. And finally, everywhere we need to pay more attention to ventilation indoors. And that's very important during the northern winter when people gather inside out of the cold. And we need, I would suggest every hospitality venue should have a carbon dioxide monitor. And when the carbon dioxide level is above the threshold, they should either open all the windows and doors or close until it returns to normal.
Well, Professor Michael Tull, thanks as always for your insights. Mark and I and the whole team here, we wish you and your family a very happy and, of course, healthy New Year.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Happy New Year indeed. Now, moving on. US President Joe Biden is scheduled to call his Russian counterpart Thursday afternoon local time, that is in the United States, to discuss a range of issues, but most importantly, the tensions regarding Ukraine.
According to US government sources, the call was requested by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The sources say that President Biden accepted because he believes direct leader-to-leader dialogue is crucial when it comes to Russia. This development comes a matter of weeks before the two countries hold high-level talks on security and Ukraine. North Korea has reportedly begun discussing its national budget for 2022 on the third day of its key ruling party meeting. The North State media reported Thursday that the previous day's fourth plenary session continued detailed discussions and plans on new policy directions and rural developments proposed on the first and second day of the event. While it's unclear how long the key party meeting will go on, previously they have lasted for 1 to 4 days. Watchers expect an announcement regarding meeting outcomes on the final day. The South Korean government is pledging to do its best to resume talks with North Korea, but it seems that prospects for talks at the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics may prove unsuccessful. Those remarks came Wednesday from South Korea's top diplomat, who also pointed out Seoul and Washington have in fact agreed on the end-of-year war declaration draft. Yoon Jung-min reports.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong says Seoul had hoped the Beijing Winter Olympics would serve as an opportunity to improve the inter-Korean ties, but added such prospects now seem difficult. Speaking at a press briefing on Wednesday, he said the government will do its utmost for the resumption of talks with North Korea.
The South Korean government will put its best efforts into improving inter-Korean ties and an early resumption of the Korean Peninsula peace process, using all chances, not giving up hope until the end.
When it comes to the South Korean government's end-of-war declaration, Chung says Seoul and Washington have effectively agreed on the draft, though details were not given. He said he reaffirmed the issue with his American counterpart, Antony Blinken, when they met at the G7 ministerial meeting earlier this month. They are currently discussing ways to engage with the North.
As for South Korea's strategy amid U.S.-China tensions, Chung says Seoul has made it clear that it seeks friendly ties with Beijing based upon the Seoul-Washington alliance, dismissing comments that the Korean government has been maintaining an ambiguous stance. When asked about sour Seoul-Tokyo ties over historical issues, the minister asked Japan to show a more sincere attitude, adding the government is seeking realistic measures for the Korean victims of wartime forced labor and sexual enslavement. Chung added the 2015 Seoul-Tokyo Agreement on the so-called comfort women victims could not fundamentally resolve the problem, but the current government did not overturn the deal, given the fact that it was a formal government agreement.
Our government is continuing talks with the victims, and we keep proposing realistic measures to the Japanese side to resolve this issue. We expect a more forward-looking, reasonable response from Japan.
Chung added that what the victims want is a sincere apology from Japan, not financial compensation. Following the 2015 agreement, the Reconciliation and Healing Foundation was created, and Japan has donated 1 billion yen, or some $9 million to the foundation, part of which was given to some of the victims. But later, the foundation was dissolved, saying that the agreement was set up without the victims' consent, and the rest of the funds remain unused. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The US has declined to directly comment on the progress made on a draft for declaring a formal end to the Korean War, only saying that it remains committed to resuming dialogue with North Korea. This according to a spokesperson at the State Department on Wednesday when asked about the South Korean foreign minister's earlier remarks that Seoul and Washington had reached a de facto agreement on the draft. The spokesperson added that the US will continue to seek engagement with the North to bring about tangible progress. Seoul believes that such a declaration could bring the North back to talks.
South Korea's terms of trade fell to an almost 9-year low in November as the prices of imports rose at a much faster pace than exports. The value of the country's outbound shipments in goods was at an all-time high, but that was outweighed by the cost of materials South Korea brought into the country. Kim Chung-ah with this report.
According to preliminary data from the Bank of Korea, South Korea's index for the value of its exported goods jumped 27.1% in November on year to a new high of 140.66 on brisk exports of chips, petrochemicals, and other key products, marking the second straight month with an on-year gain. That would normally be an impressive performance, but the index for the value of imported goods hit a record as well, rising to 159.29 due to the soaring cost of materials such as natural gas and oil, which has in turn raised the cost of other materials. From a year earlier, this is a whopping 42.8% increase, and is the 12th consecutive month import value has been higher on year. As a result, the country saw its terms of trade fall to an almost 9-year low for November. The net terms of trade index for goods, which is a gauge of overall trade terms, came to 88.27, down 10.1% from a year earlier, and marks the lowest since March 2013. What this index shows is basically how many units a country needs to export to buy a single unit of import. The figure will be below 100 when there's more capital going out of the country than coming in. It's usually a positive sign for the economy if the index is rising, but this is the 8th month in a row for South Korea that it's been falling. Kim Chung-ah, Arirang News.
Mexico will halt crude oil exports in 2023 as part of its plans to reach energy self-sufficiency. According to Mexico's state-owned producer, Pemex, it will reduce oil exports to 435,000 barrels a day in 2022 before completely phasing out exports the following year. Currently, Mexico exports about 1 million barrels every day. The measure is part of the Mexican government's plan to expand domestic production.
It It's now time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. 2021 was a year of new highs for South Korea's soft power, from hosting the Global Partnership for Growth Summit on climate action to transitioning from a middle-income economy to an advanced economy status. But these achievements were built on decades of global outreach and diplomacy for wider recognition of the country's potential to drive areas of global governance. For this, we speak to Ambassador Jun Oh, who is at the forefront of these efforts and led Korea through significant diplomatic milestones. With more than 30 years in the Foreign Service, he was the former permanent representative of South Korea to the United Nations, and he is currently the chair of Save the Children Korea. He's also educating the next generation of diplomatic experts and leaders as a professor at Kyung University. Very warm welcome to you, Ambassador. It's lovely to have you back with us.
Good morning, Suyong. It's good to be back.
Well, it's been quite a memorable year for South Korea upon its 30th anniversary of joining the United Nations. And while the occasion was made all the more meaningful as the UN Conference on Trade and Development this year, they changed the country's status to a developed economy. Now, what is the significance of this status? And also, what kind of role do you see Korea playing as a more recognized power in the international community?
Well, the new UNCTAD status, in a way, has the effect of finalizing the process for South Korea to transit itself from a developing country to a developed one. If you think about it, actually, the process has taken almost 30 years because South Korea graduated from an aid recipient and joined the OECD, a club of rich countries, in 1996. But when it comes to the trade-related organizations, it has taken more time for South Korea. It has taken more time for South Korea to be recognized as a developed country. So I think now, Korea should make more efforts to live up to its new status and contribute more to the common good of the international community.
Definitely a big year for South Korea, and a lot of expectations, anticipation on how it's going to really continue to play its role and live up to its status, as you said, in the world community. And well, there was a great amount of excitement leading up to the UN's General Assembly this year, mostly due to South Korean boy band BTS's participation in an event that highlighted progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. How has South Korea been contributing to the sustainable development of communities around the world, really based on its own development experience?
Well, BTS participation in the UN General Assembly, I think, reflects South Korea's enhanced soft power in recent years, as you pointed out. That's thanks to the successes of K-pop music and also K-movies, for example, including The Parasite and The Squid Game. The United Nations event was held to highlight the importance of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, not least when the whole world is trying to overcome the struggle for the last 2 years to fight the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. So when it comes to development goals, as I said earlier, South Korea has a great deal to share with the international community based on its own development experience, as well as the lessons learned in the process.
And while South Korea has also been trying to step up its climate diplomacy, what are some important milestones that the country has made so far, and what role do you see it playing to help the whole world go towards a carbon neutral future?
Well, this year, South Korea announced its new reduction target for carbon emissions at the climate change conference held in Scotland last November, which is to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030 below 2018 levels. This target is a significant improvement compared to our original commitment in the Paris Agreement on climate change in 2015. And South Korea also released the 2050 carbon neutrality scenarios last October. But according to specialists on climate action, this is not enough to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. But still, I think this year's announcements provide a good ground to build on so that we can come up with more ambitious roadmaps at the future opportunities in global climate action.
And also, Ambassador, recently we've been experiencing a time of geopolitical uncertainty, and some societies are all the more vulnerable to autocratic takeovers and the deprivation of their fundamental liberties. The reversal of democracy in Myanmar and Afghanistan this year, this casts strong scepticism over the West's willingness to defend liberal values. Now, while the UN has delayed the recognition of Myanmar's junta and the Taliban's designated envoys to the UN this month, is there anything more that it can do as an institution to really pressure these two regimes? What kinds of coordinated effort do you hope to see?
Well, there are things that the international community can do and cannot do about these countries. What kind of political system a country chooses to have is considered domestic affairs, and the United Nations is not supposed to intervene in them. But protection of human rights is one of the key tasks for the United Nations, and we should not just sit and watch human rights violations taking place in these countries. The Security Council has already expressed concerns over the situations, and other human rights bodies, both within and outside the UN system, are raising voices and adding pressure on these governments. South Korea, as a country that experienced its own human rights violations in the past, should also play an active role in these international watchdog activities.
And as the world also experiences this hegemonic rivalry in the world, the US is turning to its allies, and it's increasingly mentioning the formation of multilateral groups in order to protect regional security and also foster cooperation. Amid such efforts, how should South Korea engage with such initiatives to really strengthen its own position amid all this geopolitical rivalry and uncertainties?
This is not an easy issue for South Korea, as it has a great deal to do with increasing U.S.-China rivalry in this region. But I think the bottom line should be that South Korea's national security is based on the bedrock of its military alliance with the United States. Therefore, which multilateral groups South Korea will choose to join or not join might be more operational issues. South Korea's security policies need to be always coordinated with its ally, the United States.
Well, the importance of multilateralism has been emphasised when it comes to resolving the threat from North Korea. And it's quite clear that there are differences in the priorities and methods between Seoul, Washington, Pyongyang and also Beijing. What do you think is the best starting point, and what should be the clear goal of any multilateral approach to this problem?
Well, right now it is impossible to discuss threats from North Korea without addressing the North Korean nuclear issue. There used to be a multilateral approach to tackle this issue, which was called the six-party talks. But for the last 15 years, the issue has been largely left to the bilateral talks between the United States and North Korea, which are now stuck. Maybe it's time for related countries to think about reviving a multilateral approach with a view to achieving denuclearization. But at the same time, I think we should also remember that there is a kind of constant factor here, which is the United Nations sanctions on North Korea, which is based on Security Council resolution, and that is certainly also a multilateral approach.
Well, there's recently been talk of a peace declaration between the two Koreas, which would also have to be agreed upon by the United States and China. And there have been varying degrees of enthusiasm and concern over this idea. What is your view on this?
Well, there have been a lot of talks about the possible declaration, as you just mentioned, declaration to end the war, because the Korean War was stopped 65 years ago with an armistice instead of a peace treaty. A declaration cannot replace a peace treaty, legally speaking, but it could serve as a confirmation by the parties concerned of a willingness to get back to dialogue instead of continuing confrontation. As was reported earlier, according to the South Korean foreign minister yesterday, the United States and South Korea virtually agreed to pursue a declaration. But I'm not sure if North Korea is ready to go for it, especially considering that the declaration would be virtually taken as a sign for resuming the denuclearization talks.
Well, now, Ambassador, you've devoted more than 2/3 of your time in the Foreign Service to multilateral diplomacy, and you achieved key moments in Korea's diplomatic history, such as its transition from an aid recipient to a donor country at the OECD. You also chaired the Economic and Social Council when you were the country's permanent ambassador to the United Nations. And, well, what kept you motivated as you worked for the wider recognition of the country's role in the international community?
Well, my diplomatic service over 30-some years coincided with the growth of South Korea as a nation. When I started out as a Korean diplomat, there was not much South Korea could do to contribute to the international community. And therefore, multilateral diplomacy didn't mean much either. Even in the United Nations, we only took care of issues that directly concerned our own interests. But as South Korea grew economically and politically, we were able to expand our role in the international community. Our diplomacy became wider and more diverse, both in pursuing our national interest and in contributing to the world. I think I have been lucky to be part of that process.
Well, you paved the way, really, for the process for Korean diplomacy and really solidified its place in the world today. What do you then hope to see from the next generation of Korean diplomats, envoys, and maybe even representatives like BTS?
Well, I would like to see the next generation of Korean diplomats working more for the strengthening of global governance. By the term global governance, I do not just mean what the United Nations or other international organizations are doing. I would rather mean that we need more effective global cooperation to deal with mounting global challenges such as the pandemic or climate change. But unfortunately, we are stuck in the nation-state system in which countries and their political leaders concern themselves with more myopic national interests rather than the future of the whole world and entire humanity. Therefore, I believe for the next generation of diplomats, not just Korean, but of any country, it will be critically important to be open-minded and seek common good for all humanity.
Well, that's where we must leave this interview today. Ambassador Jun Oh, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a very happy New Year.
Thank you. Likewise.
Now, there are just a couple of days remaining in 2021, so we're going to continue our look back at the year's top headlines. It's been almost 12 months since Joe Biden became the President of the United States. During his time in the White House, Biden has reversed many of former President Trump's actions in a bid to restore Washington's alliances around the world. Our BNG has more on the changes and how they have impacted South Korea.
On January 6th, a mob of Donald Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. They wanted to overturn Trump's presidential election defeat by disrupting a joint session of Congress that was confirming Joe Biden's victory. Despite strong protests on January 20th, Joe Biden became the 46th president of the United States. Right after he took office, he reversed many of Trump's actions. He ordered for the U.S. to officially rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement after Trump had announced in June 2017 that he was pulling the U.S. out, arguing that it would undermine the American economy.
I'm going to sign you, and that's what we do while you're all here. The commitment I made that we're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord as of today.
Biden also halted the U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization before it was due to go into effect and decided to resume funding for the agency. Earlier, Trump had cut off funding to the UN Health Agency, saying it was virtually controlled by China. After 4 years of a Trump administration that led the country's foreign policy through an America First rule, Biden said in his first address before a global audience that America was back.
America is back. I speak today as President of the United States at the very start of my administration, and I'm sending a clear message to the world. America is back. The transatlantic alliance is back.
He vowed to restore alliances through diplomacy and pledged to bring back Washington's leadership position on the global stage. He said that his administration would work towards claiming credibility and moral authority. On May 21st, Biden held a summit with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, which the Blue House called a huge success. During a joint news conference at the White House afterwards, President Moon announced that the missile restrictions on South Korea had been lifted, 42 years after they were first imposed. This allowed South Korea to develop ballistic missiles capable of reaching targets far beyond the Korean Peninsula.
우리 두 사람은 연합 방위 태세를 더욱 강화해 나가기로 하고 전시 작전권 전환을 위한 양국의 의지를 재확인했습니다. 또한 기쁜 마음으로 미사일 지침 종료 사실을 전합니다.
The two also agreed that their goal is to bring complete denuclearization to the Korean Peninsula. But one industry watcher says what's more important is to see whether the two countries will be able to implement the agreement.
Overall, this joint statement is kind of a very important guideline for the principle that South Korea and the United States can cooperate in the future. It includes not only security guarantee for the South Korea, but also overall kind of principle how to deal with China. Of course, South Korea and the United States did not specify mention about the China, but the overall so-called the liberal international order is definitely reflect in this joint statement.
He added that South Korea faces a huge task in balancing relations between both the U.S. and China. While the Biden administration wants Korea to join its alliance network to counter China, South Korea is in a different position than other allies, as it needs to be on good terms with China in order to resume peace talks with North Korea. 배은지, Arirang News.
And staying with the big headlines from 2021, it was a year when most of the world said it was high time to get serious about tackling climate change. Kim Ji-yeon has more on what may have pushed world leaders to pledge, at least, to work toward a greener future.
This year's COP26 summit held in Glasgow in November was seen as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to gather the pledges of world leaders and accelerate action. A joint statement was reached at COP26 to keep within reach of the goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It also signaled that the world has finally come to an agreement to accept the scientific evidence that supports the need to unite together to combat climate change.
I think it shows that, yes, there is a consensus around the notion that we need to get away from coal and we need to get away from fossil fuels as well.
Despite mixed results regarding last-minute drama over the words phase down or phase out regarding coal use of the Glasgow Climate Pact, one by one countries renewed their pledges to meet carbon neutrality goals within the next 30 to 50 years, with a lessened reliance on fossil fuels and by promoting the use of cleaner, more sustainable renewable sources. It was also expected that the Glasgow event will build on the P4G Seoul Summit held in May that emphasized the need for a platform for public-private partnerships that can carry out climate change responses effectively. One of the biggest accomplishments from COP26 is the global consensus around the urgent need to reduce methane emissions, which is seen as crucial in reaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. More than 100 countries representing more than 2/3 of the global economy, including South Korea, have promised to collectively reduce 30% of man-made methane emissions by 2030. Also during COP26, South Korea revised its nationally determined contribution 2030 target to 40% from 2018 levels, a steep increase from its initial 26.3% reduction target. That target is considered as a crucial stepping stone for the country to achieve net zero by 2050. South Korea said it plans to play the bridging role to narrow the gap between developed and developing countries in the energy transition.
선진국들이 바라는 감축과 개도국들이 바라는 적응과 재원이 균형적인 합의에 이룰 수 있도록 적극 기여하겠습니다.
The next UN climate conference is slated to be held in Egypt in November 2022. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. China on Wednesday successfully launched its Tianhui-4 satellite into space from its Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China. The launch marked the country's 404th flight mission of the Long March series of carrier rockets. Developed by the Chinese Association of Science and Technology, these satellites will be used for Earth observation and mapping for civil and military uses. The Tianhui program, which translates to sky drawing, started in 2005, with the first launch being conducted in 2011. China has been ramping up its space program in the past year, with the latest satellite launch marking their 54th in just 2021 alone. A Russian court on Wednesday ordered the shutdown of the Memorial Human Rights Center, the key unit of the Memorial Rights Group which Russia's Supreme Court liquidated earlier this week. The latest move comes as state prosecutors accuse both organizations of breaking a law requiring groups to register as foreign agents. They also added that the center's work justified terrorism and extremism. However, the organization insists the charges against them are politically motivated.
It is a difficult question why it happened, why now? And some, so to speak, close to the authorities' colleagues told us that there is an idea to start a cleanup of the Russian human rights field, and to start with us.
The memorial was first established in the final years of the Soviet Union and initially investigated crimes from the Soviet period. It later began inquiring into modern-day abuses before being shut down this year. The shutdown order was condemned both by international rights groups and the U.S. State Department. Cristiano Ronaldo was seen in India on Tuesday. Not the footballer himself, but a statue of the Manchester United star, which was unveiled by authorities in India's western state of Goa. The golden statue showing Ronaldo kicking a ball was installed to inspire youth to take football to the next level in the state.
This is nothing but to inspire our youth. If you want to take football to the other level, then this is what boys and girls will get inspired, looking at him, taking selfies with him.
But a statue of Ronaldo is nothing new for the 36-year-old five-time Ballon d'Or winner. Regarded as one of the greatest to ever play the sport, he's seen several statues made in his honor over the years. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good Good morning. Freezed air moved in overnight and helped to push away the dust in the air, but cold wave alerts have been reissued in upper parts of the country. Afternoon highs will also be noticeably colder today, and it will only get colder for the next few days, meaning we'll be ending 2021 under more bone-chilling temperatures. What's more, along with freezing temperatures, heavy snow is in the forecast. Snow clouds have formed in the west, dropping snow in Jeollado, Chungcheongnam provinces right now. And Jeollado could see up to 15 centimeters of snowfall. Meanwhile, Ulleungdo and Dokdo could see up to 40 centimeters of heavy snowfall, with a heavy snow advisory being in place there. Morning temperatures are 4 to 5 degrees lower than the same time yesterday. Gwangju, Busan at -1. And daily highs will also be 5 to 7 degrees lower this afternoon. Gwangju and Daegu will go up to 4 degrees Celsius. Please dress extra warmly and stay safe out on the roads today. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world. That's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Friday for our final edition this year of New Day at Arirang. I'm Oh Seung.
And I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for joining us. I'll be back with our next newscast at 10 a.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.
Everyone knows I'm passionate. Know why? Look at how passionate Koreans are. And you know I'm fast. Don't blink. Koreans move fast too. I'm creative on the pitch. People say I'm smart. Just look how smart Korea is. I aim to be spectacular for the fans. Why am I so fun? Is it because Korea is so much fun? Visit Korea and find out.